Thank you. Before I start, we should all really just give a round of acknowledgement to Nancy Knowlton. We're here because of her great idea, started a number of years ago, to really focus on success, right? It's so easy to think about all the things that are going wrong, and it's just really incredible for me to be here with all of you and see everything that we've all accomplished and to hear it all. So just a shout out to Nancy for her vision and everything that she's done. So for more than a decade, the Walton Family Foundation has invested in sustainable fisheries. And there are really three main reasons for this. First, fisheries in the oceans, they play a key role in maintaining the health of oceans. Fishing, or more accurately, overfishing, can significantly alter the overall dynamic in the oceans. They impact the health of fish populations, ocean biodiversity, ecosystem structure and function, and we're even learning now impacting the microbial environment, which is so important to maintaining the chemistry of the oceans. Second, billions of people depend on healthy fisheries for their job and their food. And third, we actually know how to fix them. And we're here to tell optimistic stories, so I thought the oceans would be a good place to start. At the Walton Family Foundation, we're optimistic about the future of the world's fisheries. It's an optimism built on hard work, tempered by realism about the challenges ahead. For those of us in this space, it's been about 20 years since the idea of sustainable seafood first took hold, and about a decade since retailers like Walmart and other large retailers committed to sourcing sustainable seafood. What was missing as the demand for sustainable seafood has grown was the question of supply. Can the world catch and or grow enough seafood in a sustainable way to meet this demand? Our view is that it can and it must. And I don't think you're going to hear from any of us up here a single silver bullet about how to do this work. It's complex, but there are success stories, and hopefully we'll get into a conversation about what they tell us about what works. And for us, we think that success comes from a systems approach. Very often the work in the environment has been very transactional, and we think that might get you a block, but it doesn't get you a long-term win. So what we've been focused on is a series of strategies or approaches. One is to empower fishermen and local communities through rights-based management approaches that provide secure tenure rights to fishermen and give them the incentive to become stewards of the resource. Making science-based decisions about annual catch limits, habitat protection, and rebuilding timelines. Harnessing the market, those retailers that I talked to you about, for creating a demand for sustainable seafood that will drive change at the country level. Building capacity for fishermen, governments, and the civil sector to engage. And finally, reforming public policies to create positive incentives that encourage sustainable fishing. So let me take you to two places to show that success is possible. The first is Raja Ampat. For the past 11 years, we've partnered with grantees CI, WWF, TNC, and many others to create a network of marine protected areas in the Bird's Head region. Now, Indonesia has a population of 283 million people, for which seafood is a primary source of protein. So this is an important issue for them, not just ecologically, but it's important for them economically and for the health of their country and their communities. It's the world's second largest fishing nation, and fishing provides nearly 9 million jobs, a significant number of which are in the small scale sector, so all the more important. And if you look at all the related jobs, we're impacting somewhere on the order of 20 million jobs with fisheries in Indonesia. In terms of economic value, in 2013, Indonesia exported nearly $5 billion in seafood. And there's recent studies that suggest if we're able to recover and rebuild those fisheries, that value could go up by $2.3 billion. So instead of having exported $5 billion, they would have exported 7.3. Not an insignificant contribution to the overall economic well-being. So for us, we focus on the economy and healthy environment going hand in hand. Lori Katz, who's in the audience with CI, took me in February to Indonesia and gave me a chance to see the work that we've been funding in person. And that's something that sometimes funders don't do enough of. We sit behind a desk and we fund things and we don't actually get out and understand whether or not it's having a real impact. This is a group of leaders from across the Bird's Head region. This is a group of leaders who came together to sign an agreement to manage the MPAs and to fish more sustainably. They're invested in the process because we identified an individual leader. We brought them, our partners, I should say. We built trust with them by identifying a leader, building capacity in the community, engaging them in designing the system, and giving them the authority and the responsibility for enforcing it and managing it, and being able to show them the benefits. So as a result of their efforts, some of the things we're now seeing is that the rate of illegal fishing is declining dramatically, down 90%. There are more fish and they're bigger. And fishermen are fishing smarter, not harder, with greater food security for their families and their countries. Clearly a success story and a sense of optimism. But it took us 11 years, right, in this one area. And it's only a small, it's not even the whole country which we've got to get to, and it's using one set of strategies. So now let's go from Indonesia to a place a little closer to home, the Gulf of Mexico. For decades, fishing in the Gulf and across the United States had been declining. In 2006, a bipartisan Congress reauthorized the Magnuson-Stevens Act, laying the groundwork for a new approach to fisheries management. It required that the best available science be used to set annual catch limits and that we have rigorous rebuilding timelines, and it allowed for something that they called limited access privilege programs, which we now know as catch shares. A year later, NOAA introduced a new management system in the Gulf of Mexico for the red snapper fishery that strengthened monitoring and, importantly, gave participants the right to catch a set percentage of the allocation. So they got this tenure right that I talked about in Indonesia, just in a different way in the States. And what we saw is that the number of red snappers started to increase as we put in place these management systems. And so did each fisherman's share of the pie, right, because they had this allocation. This gave them an incentive to think in the long term and not in the short term, and dramatically change the nature of the fishery. So as a result of those changes, fishermen pushed for a 40% reduction in annual catch limits so the stock could recover, and red snapper have rebounded. Fishermen can land nearly 3 times more snapper today than they could in 2008. Revenues are up 70%, and commercial fishing has become safer. Fresh Gulf snapper is now available year-round to Americans' consumers, and it's recognized by the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch as a sustainable choice. And what we're seeing in the Gulf is happening in other parts of the U.S. as well. Since 2000, the number of fish stocks declared overfished has dropped from 92 to 38. 41 stocks have been rebuilt to healthy levels, and American jobs supported by domestic fisheries now number 1.8 million, up 15% since 2011. Now, amidst this, I would be remiss not to say that there are places where things aren't going so well. If you're from New England, you know the challenges. If you're in the South Atlantic. But overall, the picture of fisheries and the health of fisheries in the U.S. is a success story. If I had more time, I'd want to tell you about other places where we're seeing similar opportunities for success. In the Colorado River, we're working within the existing law of the river to put in place market mechanisms that are going to allow for more flexibility in how water is traded and used. And we've seen a sea change in the conversations. Recently, the governments have come to the environmental community and said, let's start to work together. The agriculturalists and the environmentalists are sitting down to find common solutions. Similarly, we're working in the Mississippi River Basin to change farming practices on 100 million acres of cropland. We know how to do that. The challenge now is how to scale it. And finally, in the coastal Gulf of Mexico, we're working to direct the settlement funds that came out of the Gulf oil spill to do large-scale restoration. And we believe that the restoration can be achieved at a scale so that we'll rebuild the salt marshes in a way that provide environmental returns, protect the city of New Orleans and the Gulf, the port of New Orleans, from which 40% of products come into the U.S., as well as enabling transportation and people to live there. So for us, the opportunity we see is in creating new partnerships among conservation organizations, business groups, and communities to restore the health of oceans and rivers. We know that the decisions we make over the next 5 to 10 years for the climate, the oceans and coasts, the air we breathe, and the water we drink will determine what kind of world we leave to our children and grandchildren. Our challenge in this room is to come together as individuals, as organizations, as governments, to learn from the stories of success that are being told here in all of the conference space, and take the actions necessary to leave a healthy environment for the future. Thank you.